welcome everybody. This is Ask the Experts About Broccoli. And why broccoli? Because 2023 is the year of the broccoli. That's our program that we are promoting right now. And one of the first questions I want to ask both of you, I mean, like, let's say you're at a picnic or a cocktail party or something, and people find out what you do. What is the first question they have for you about broccoli or about growing broccoli?
So the most popular question I ever had is, how many heads is there on each broccoli plant?
And do you have that
So
answer?
well, yeah, as a scientist, I always go for the complicated route. It depends. So most of the broccoli start with a one main head. That's what you usually see in the supermarket. And once the main head is cut off, the side shoots will start to come out, and depending on which variety and your growing condition, and then that number just accumulates really fast. So it usually just one head, but there can be more.
Excellent. Okay, Sakata, sorry, Heather, which
call me Sakata.
is the most common question you get?
I get a lot about heat tolerance. I'm in Southern California, so if I'm talking to people, a lot of people think about gardening as only May, June, July, or maybe May through August. So I do a lot of talking about spring and fall crops when I'm talking to those folks, because maybe they haven't had the best luck if they wait until June to plant something in a really hot summer or hot area. So that's, I'd say, the most common one for me.
And we are definitely going to address that timing issue. So in a few questions, we will do that. Maybe a lot of people think that there's only one type of broccoli, the traditional, like Sufei said, you see it in the grocery store, there's one big head, main stalk, etc. But there are different types. There's probably more than even I realize. So which one of you wants to talk about different types of broccoli?
I can do that.
I can go.
Oh,
okay, Heather, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go first, and then you can fill in, because I'm sure I'll forget some. There's a lot. I think of them as kind of commercially, especially, you think of a crown type or a bunching type. We kind of group them by what they're used for. So sometimes in the grocery store, you'll see one big crown. Sometimes you'll see a bundle that has a little bit more of a stem. And then we talk about florets a lot, and that's a broccoli that's used for cutting. I don't know if you all can see the picture, but say the individual stems on the broccoli head maybe are a little bit longer and divided a little bit more, making it better for cutting into florets, either for freezing or that broccoli salad that somebody was mentioning earlier. And then there's baby broccoli, which we should talk about later on. And then broccoli rabe is another kind of older heirloom, I guess, type of plant that's I think from Italy and used there in a lot of cooking there. It's a little bit stronger flavor, a little bit smaller heads. It's probably a distant relative of broccoli from a long time ago would be my guess, my unscientific guess.
So then we'll toss it over to the science.
Yeah.
Let's see what she says.
Yeah, I see Greg from the chat pointed out broccolini. I think Heather was mentioning the baby broccoli, and the broccolini is a special brand of baby broccoli. And we also call that stem broccoli, where the side shoots that, as I mentioned, that's coming out after the main crown's cut. If we're growing that type of broccoli as a main purpose, then we call that a stem broccoli, in addition to the crown type that we are seeing. And I guess I will add just one piece of useless information from a taxonomy perspective of view, that purple cauliflower is technically broccoli. So
I did not know that.
I did not know that either. Learn something new every day, right?
And there are purple types of broccoli also, but they fall into these regular types, right? A stem purple broccoli.
Yes, that's anthocyanin expressed in the crown, which is a natural defending chemical that's produced in broccoli, which also have been reported to have some health benefit for the consumers. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's great. Broccoli's already healthy, but then you add the purple coloring to it and it's even more so, I'm assuming. You mentioned the broccolini, and I've always thought this was rather interesting, but broccolini is a brand name, correct? And it is not a type of broccoli. It is a type of baby broccoli or stem broccoli. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep, you've got it.
Okay, so broccolini is a trade name, brand name that is really only used for commercial production, correct?
Right. So for the home gardener, I would look for something called stem broccoli or baby broccoli. I like baby broccoli because, but it doesn't. Stem broccoli is more descriptive of what it actually looks like.
Because I do see Greg had asked about getting broccolini seeds. So it wouldn't be broccolini, it would be stem broccoli. And at the bottom of our Year of the Broccoli page, there are a lot of resources on where to buy broccoli seeds. And for the most part, it just links it to, for example, Johnny's or Territorial or Burpee, to their entire broccoli page. And I'm sure you will find quite a few stem broccolis there. So that's the source for where to buy broccoli seeds, because everybody is already inspired, it looks like, to go out and buy their broccoli. And okay, so what is new? And not necessarily new, but what are you as breeding companies working on? What need are you fulfilling with some of your new breeding work? What will make it easier for the home gardener to grow this? But also toss in some of the things you're doing for the commercial side, because all of us buy broccoli in the store. So it'd be interesting to know what you're doing to make that broccoli improved. So I love this part of the discussion where we get to find out what you're working on, as long as you don't tell any trade secrets, because this is public.
Okay, I will start. So that's the baby project I'm working on. So in Seminis, we are working on a new series of broccoli called high rise. So instead of a conventional type of broccoli, you have a crown hidden in the canopy under the leaves. So it's hard, honestly, for the harvester to cut it and find it, and it's ergonomically not friendly. And that translates to the home garden as well. It's hard to maintain and upkeep the broccoli plant. So we thought about, then we need to bring the heads up above the canopy on top of the leaves, so that the people can see it easily, identify how they're doing, where they are in terms of maturity. So now our high-rise broccoli are growing on top of the leaves instead of hidden in the canopy. And besides the ease of harvest benefit, we found that the main stem, because it's exerted, it's less fibrous and much more tender and sweeter to eat. So that's one of the surprising side benefit of our high-rise broccoli. Besides that, the other thing we are working on is comprehensive disease resistance. So once with the disease resistance, it requires less pesticides applications, easier to manage, and less chemical residue. And that's a really, really important benefit and virtue for the end consumers. So.
Excellent. Okay, so Sakata. See, Heather, for so long, I've known you at various companies, but I am going to continue to call you Sakata.
That's okay.
Heather, what is Sakata working on in addition to those?
Yeah, in addition to that, I would say always early maturity is always something we're looking for. And then for the home garden specifically, I'm looking for compact plants. I think gardens are getting smaller and smaller, so that's always on my radar. Commercially, I think we're kind of, I don't want to say diversifying, but there are different varieties for different markets, like I just mentioned. So if somebody's trying to cut it into florets, then we're looking for a plant that lends itself, better to that. Where if we're looking for a crown that's going to ship somewhere far away. Maybe we're looking commercially for something that would hold well after harvest and not discolor and stay nice and compact and not get broken up in the grocery store. So those kind of characteristics too. And then flavor, I don't know. I always go back to flavor too. That's important, both commercially and home garden, for the home garden.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what Sufei said about the taste of the stem.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times, either at home or at somebody else's house, and I see them chopping up the broccoli and they throw away the stem. And I'm like, no, 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 no. So
It's the best part.
I know, right? Oh my gosh. Oven roasted at a real high temperature with sprinkled with lemon pepper. That's my favorite, is that stem of the broccoli. So, and I diverge talking about food again, but that's okay. It's a vegetable. Okay, talk about early maturity a little bit more. Like if there's a broccoli that was put on the market 23 years ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago, how many days to maturity was it then versus what you're getting now, some of the newer varieties?
Yeah, it's always varied a lot. So there's always been later, at least as long as I've been around, there's always been later varieties and earlier varieties. And I prefer to reach to the earlier varieties, because in most cases, especially like I talked about earlier, when you're worried about heat tolerance, if you have a short spring, then an early variety is going to help you get a harvest before it gets too hot. And if you have a short fall, an early variety is going to help you get that harvest before it gets too cold. So I would say that about all vegetables. Like if you can get, if especially if you're under any kind of pressure, weather pressure, you're not in the perfect growing conditions, the earlier you can get a crop out of the field or your garden, the better, because you don't have the extra time for pests to find it, and weather events and that kind of thing. So I think it's always better.
Sufei, any other comments from you about early maturing or maturity dates, times?
I don't have my favorite or my preference. I think it's people, the grower themselves, finding their own needs. And we breed for early maturity, medium maturity, as well as late maturity. Early one will be less likely to get caught in the undesirable situation, but on the other hand, late maturity gives you that easy laid back pace to grow, and also it's much more higher yield. So the harvest time, or the per harvest weight, you'll get more. So I mean, I'm open that if anyone has questions, please feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I can give you personalized advice on which one to go. And I don't have preference. You don't have to grow Seminis. And I know Sakata variety very well because we are competitors. So I'll help you find the best one you need.
So remind me, both of you, if you want to put like your LinkedIn address at the end of it, you can put it in the chat. But I've heard both of you now say something about ideal conditions, perfect growing conditions. Tell me where in North America is one of the most perfect regions, climates to grow broccoli, and why?
California.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say like the Pacific West Coast is suitable for broccoli all year round, really. But in California, we do get much less disease compared to the Pacific Northwest. So really, so broccoli is considered a cool season crop. It prefers to be harvested between the temperature of 70 to 95 degrees. Therefore, that's usually, you were mentioning about timing. I recommend people to do some calculations before they plant a variety, is to really plan to harvest within that temperature frame, so you can ensure the quality and a harvest of your broccoli crop.
Yeah, I think timing for broccoli is probably one of the big challenges, and we can talk a little bit more about that. I know that both of you work with Johnny Selected Seeds, and for consumers, they have this wonderful seed starting chart. Maybe Gail can put that in the chat. So it's a seed starting calculator. What you do is you enter your zip code, because then it knows what your zone is, and it tells you like how many weeks before first frost to plant. And I think they also have a fall planting calculator for fall crops. So for all of us who are not in California, and a big part of us are in kind of this zone 5, 6, 7 area, I'm thinking. I'm not sure if we've got anybody in zones other than that, but for those of us who are not living in the ideal conditions, what are your recommendations? When do we start our seeds? Or if we buy transplants at the local garden center, when do we plant them? And then what about fall planting? So maybe you guys can just together talk about some of those timing issues.
Yeah, I think that Johnny's calculator is a great resource. Also, Farmer's Almanac has one, because not everybody knows their zone, and it's hard to remember your last frost date, so if you need to look that up, that's good. But yeah, I think depending on what size plant you want to transplant, I would start seeds somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks before your last frost date if you're going to plant in the spring. And then the fall, again, it kind of depends on where you live. I do almost all fall planting here in Southern California because we have a cooler, winter, spring, but then it warms right up at the end of spring. So I don't always have time to get a whole crop in. So I have the most success in the fall. But for other people, I think the spring probably, in the zones you mentioned, spring is going to probably be your best bet, especially if you get really cold, in September. Then you don't really have time, maybe from the high heat of summer to the cold of winter. There's not enough space in there maybe sometimes. So I would recommend that most people start in the spring.
Okay, Sufei, you want to talk about some of the areas that maybe could start in the fall, what the timing is for a fall crop?
So I would always do the back calculation, regardless if fall or spring. So looking at your target broccoli maturity dates. So before frost, even around frost harvest for broccoli, it's okay. I mean, frost is not going to damage broccoli that much. So you calculate back the maturity date. So for example, the fall, typically it would be 70 days, maximum 80 days of the crop. You take that back. So if your first frost date is November 1st, so you take 80 days back, that would bring you to the mid-August harvest, if I'm correct, mid-harvest transplant.
Yeah.
So that's when you want to get the crop into the ground, and then you need 40 days around, or 30 days to transplant. So you would go back that your sowing date would probably be somewhere late June, the latest, for fall crop. But I think a lot of the stores where you can buy transplants, that's really helpful for you to save time at home and just do the transplant somewhere in July or August, and then you will have broccoli to eat before the winter comes.
Okay, good advice there. So it looks like we are getting a lot of questions about pests. So I think we're going to jump right into those, and then as we have time, we'll go back to some of the other growing questions. And might as well just how do we make broccoli less attractive to pests? Can you speak about cabbage moss? How to keep bugs away from the broccoli plants? Are there organic ways? So let's just start overall with some of the most damaging pests that are attracted. They love broccolis too, but how do we make sure that we keep the plants there so that we can eat the broccoli? And what are some of them? And I know that that's probably regional specific, but can you name some of the pests other than, let's see, I guess they asked about cabbage moss.
Yeah, so I can start with the cabbage moth, and that scientifically we call that diamondback moth. So it got a diamondback on their back. That's why they got their name. So the moth themselves doesn't eat cabbage or broccoli. It's the worm that eats the leaf. There hasn't been really effective way to prevent it or control the damage in home garden. One of the things I always recommend is neem oil. It's very safe to use at home, and it's all natural ingredient. What it does is really deter the moth away from laying eggs on the leaves, so it will not get eaten. To a certain point, I think once the broccoli started buttoning, so you start to see very small broccoli head on the plant, that's where I think you can lay back and don't worry about the pest anymore, because it takes time for the moth to, for the worm to grow big enough to cause enough damage to your plant that before you harvest the head, there's not enough damage to cause you any yield loss. So that rule also applies to other pests that you will see, which, for example, the beetles. The flea beetles is the worst beetles for broccoli. Those, it's important to control when your plants are small. And then when they started to buttoning again, you can lay back and it's not going to cause more damage to your head. Then the last thing and most common, one of the most common insect you will see is aphids. It usually don't cause damage anymore on a mature plant, again, where the broccoli has started buttoning, and it's only when it's really small plant, like a transplant before 6 leaves, that you have to worry about it in general. So, of course, the most effective way to control each type of insect will differ, but I think in general, neem oil is a very safe, wide use organic way to control all the insects. I typically, at my own home garden, I spray very diluted neem oil, probably 0.01% every week. I have a giant bottle of very diluted neem oil that I just spray, like pretending I'm getting rid of the dust, but I'm also spraying a little bit neem oil to keep all the insects away from my edible plants. Even my rose will get some spray sometimes. So I hope that helps.
Oh, that does. Yeah. Because somebody had just asked, can I use neem oil for all my vegetable plants? And I think I hear you saying yes. We always say follow label directions, but are you saying that following label directions is probably overkill? You can use a reduced dilution, I guess, a reduced ratio then of neem oil?
Yes. So I believe the label typically for concentrated, it would say 0.01. I use that like 10% of that concentration. Okay. So I can, it's really because of the smell, not because that I could not do more, but if I spray too frequently, that smell is keeping me away. So
well, to keep you away, hopefully
it repels you too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so to go back to the moss, like you said, it's not the moss, it's their larva. And what about row covers? Is that, when do you need to cover? Is that an effective method of preventing them from decimating your plants?
Yeah, I
Row
think row
cover.
covers. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't understand what is row cover. To cover the ground?
Or the
I'll let
plants themselves, like in a hoop, the little
Oh,
and
I
that
see.
is effective if you're having trouble with larger pests. That would keep them off of the broccoli while it was laying, the eggs for the larvae. So that any kind of mechanical thing you can do to keep the pests off there is probably a good idea. That it can be high maintenance and it can stop some air circulation, so you don't want to overdo it. But if you find you're having a lot of trouble with, um, you know, little animals in addition to insects, that sometimes can slow them down a little bit.
So I guess the other solution too is to just be diligent to pick them off, depending on how many broccoli plants. I mean, I'm assuming that the average home grower doesn't have 100 broccoli plants.
Yeah, yeah. And
But
plant extra. So that's a benefit of starting from seed. But you also can go back to the store and buy more too. So
buy more
um,
transplants. Yeah.
yeah. So, but when I start things from seed, I just always start extra because sometimes they don't germinate, or, something the cat sits on it. All kinds of things can happen when those baby plants are really small. So I just always have some extras so that I can switch that out. And then if you have them left at the end of the season, or at the end of the planting time, you can give them to your neighbors or
There you go.
whatever. They
Share the
don't
wealth.
have to go to waste.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Here's another question. Pill bugs, same kind of thing. I've not seen pill bugs around my broccoli, but I've not been that successful with my broccoli. That's why I'm doing this today. Pill bugs, is that a major issue with just broccoli, or is it in general? Pill bugs are out there, and what should you do, if anything? Are they going to do much damage to your broccoli?
I have not seen pillbug doing real damage to broccoli. They, of course, they are not beautiful to look at, unlike butterflies. But I don't expect them to be damaging to broccoli.
Okay. And then Sufei, with the neem oil sprays, do you have to spray more frequently if the weather is rainy? So when a rain comes, is it going to wash all that neem oil off, and should you spray again after a rain?
I'm tentative to say yes. However, I don't have experience in California dealing with rain.
It doesn't rain here.
Except for this
In the summer.
Okay.
Yeah, I assume it's oil.
Yeah. Common sense makes it sound like, yeah, probably should, if it's going to rain, and wash it off. Depends on how hard the rain is too. So, okay, that was great. Great questions, great answers there. Let's circle back. You guys can still ask more questions in the chat and we will get back to them. But let's talk about starting from seed. Every seed is a little bit different. So let's talk about starting from broccoli. Does it need light to germinate? Does it need heat to germinate? Does it need any scarification or anything? Let's talk about starting from seed.
Yeah, so it's not particularly picky. I think it's fairly easy to start. The seeds are small. I would say my biggest struggle is making sure I don't plant too many. So I like to put them right into little pots so I can make sure I don't get too many seedlings in there. Cover lightly, keep well watered. It doesn't like to be too hot or too cold, like 50 to 80 degrees maybe at the most for germination. And I keep things covered until the seeds start to germinate, and then I would take that cover off, and that's to keep the area moist so the seeds don't dry out while they're trying to germinate.
Yeah, I agree with Heather, and planting from seed is not that picky. If you want to really start your seed right off the final destination, I would recommend double sow. So put 2 seeds per location. So ensure you have one plant that will grow out.
Okay, and you're
It does not need a heat mat.
It does not need a heat mat. Okay, so it's not like a pepper that needs a heat mat to germinate. And since they're small, do you leave them on top of the soil, or do you just barely cover the soil? Because I know the whole depth of planting can equate to the size of the seed.
Yeah, I would. That's my rule of thumb. If you're standing in the garden and you don't know At least if the seed is a 1/4 inch, then you plant it a 1/4 inch deep. It doesn't always work, but if you don't have your seed packet with you and you're trying to figure it out, that works sometimes. For broccoli, I would cover it again to keep the seed moist. It doesn't need a lot of light to germinate, so it's not one of those that you have to put on the top of the soil. So I would cover it, but
Okay.
not 5 inches down
Right.
in
Yeah.
the soil, like a 1/4, an 1/8 of an inch or less, just enough to cover it, basically.
Okay, good. And then when will it need light? Shortly when it gets that first set of leaves or the first set of true leaves? At what point does it need light, and how much light should it have indoors when you're growing them from seed?
I just start them in the light and then you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't need dark to germinate. There are things that do, but so I would just start it under the light and bright light for, at least 6 to 8 hours a day. I'm not an expert there, but I put it next to a window that gets some good light.
Okay, Sufei, any comments on lighting, how much lighting to give them when they're in the seedling stage?
Right after seedling stage, they can do really well in full sun. So, I mean, it's the heat that you don't want it to
Mhm.
get on the transplant, but they will do very well in full sun.
Okay.
And the partial shade works well. So by the windowsill, if you have to start before the frost at home, that the windowsill would be where I would go.
Okay, and somebody has asked if May is too late to start broccoli seeds, and I think the answer to that is, well, it depends where you are.
Yeah, go to one of those timers that you put your zip code in, I think would be the best
Exactly. Yeah.
advice because it depends on where you are.
We have found that with these webinars that a huge percentage of the questions, the answer is, well, it depends.
Well, if you're in Florida, it's a lot different than if you're
Yeah,
in North Dakota or Southern
exactly.
California,
Yeah, yeah. So,
Ohio. Everywhere's a little bit different. And even within states, there's 20 minutes from me is a whole different zone. So it can be
absolutely.
a little
Yeah.
bit different.
So rather than us answering that now, use that calculator that we put in there and put your zip code in and find out when you should be starting that indoors and when you can transplant it outside.
Yep. And check your maturity dates. I think that was the
Yeah.
other good
Yeah, that is a good point. Right. Yeah. Because it could make a
advice
difference
earlier on.
a later maturing one. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the next thing here? What about a fan? What about putting a fan on your seedlings? Is that a good idea, a bad idea?
I don't I don't think it would hurt anything if you wanted to. I mean, air circulation for plants in general is a good thing. But they will grow in your windowsill without a fan.
Yes. And then can one of you talk about hardening off? So you've started these indoors. What's the process to get them ready for the big bad world?
Yeah, so that if they've been really sheltered indoors in your house and you're talking to them twice a day and
And
you
putting the
know,
fan on and gently,
yeah,
tickling them like that.
perfect light and fan. They can be a little bit delicate. So what I like to do is I actually have mine on a wheeled cart. Some that I will, once they're 4 to 6 inches tall, or I'm getting close to where I want to start transplanting, I will roll it out to a shady spot outdoors and leave it out there for the first day and then back in at night. Um, and just do that for a few days. And then eventually I'm rolling it out into the sun and letting it be in the sun for a while. And after you do that for a couple days, you're good. Maybe leave it overnight. Depends on it depends on your like nighttime temperatures. If it's getting super cold, you don't necessarily want to leave it out at night. But if you're in the spring and the nights are pretty warm, then you can just start leaving the plants out overnight for a few days before you transplant into the garden.
I always look for the winds that are coming here. We're in
Yeah.
the prairie of the Midwest. So
Yeah.
on a windy day, those babies just, they didn't do well. So
Yeah, that's a good point too. The first spot that I use in the shade is on the patio and right next to the house. So the house is blocking that wind because that wind will kill those poor little guys in like one day if it's too strong.
yeah, exactly. Circling back to temperature, the question was, and I think, Heather, you had said the heat to germinate, and it looks like a pretty broad range, 50 to 80 degrees. Is that the soil temperature or the air temperature?
I would say air temperature. I don't take a temperature of this. Well, I think it would be the same thing if you're in your house with
If
the
you're starting it in your house.
soil. Yeah, if you're speaking about direct seeding outside, then it would be the soil temperature.
Right, right. Okay, so we've got a question about how to stop bolting in the summer. Well, if you can control Mother Nature with her temperatures, that's the first way. That's my first answer, but I'm sure you guys might have a better answer on that one.
Can I bring the sad news that we cannot stop bolting if they already started?
Yeah, that's what I was afraid you were going to say. Yeah.
Yeah. So to prevent bolting, one thing you can do is pick the right variety for your region based on your zip code. The why it starts bolt is because once broccoli accumulated enough cold days, it will start the regenerative process of producing seeds. So if you're planting a warm season variety, those heat tolerant variety, it's more likely to bolt in the cold. And if you are planting a fast, early maturing broccoli, it's more likely to bolt because of the speed of the maturity. So that's where you balance your trade-off by selecting the right variety for your zip code. If bolting is a big issue in your region based on your experience, then you just might want to go with a slower variety, which is not that tolerant to the heat. So you harvest in kind of late fall when the temperature is cooler, or you can just kind of wait a little bit more in the spring to early summer, where so preventing bolt will give you a harvest versus less quality broccoli. So
Well, and let me ask this question. I hadn't thought of this before. For example, when I'm planting my tulips or daffodils, you have early spring blooming, mid-spring blooming, late spring blooming. For a home gardener, would you recommend, whatever number of broccoli plants you want, plant 3 or 4 that are early maturing and then 3 or 4 that are later maturing, so you have a combination of both? Is that a good idea or not?
Yeah, that'd be a good solution. And if you're planting different varieties, then you're reducing your risk, right? Because
Yeah.
depending on what, some of us don't know exactly what our weather's going to be anyway. So if you really want some broccoli, planting, different varieties with different traits is a great idea. Also, harvesting on time. I know I'm guilty of this. Like, keep an eye on it. When it's ready, pick it. Don't I know when your garden looks so pretty, you just want to leave everything and show all the, the beautiful harvest or whatever. But when it's ready, harvest it. And with broccoli, you can harvest that central head. And we talked about side shoots earlier. Then the plant will produce side shoots. So don't mess around, get out there and keep an eye on it. And when it's ready, go ahead and harvest that main head.
Good point, because then
that way it doesn't have time to bolt.
Right.
Yeah. And plant a mixture of crown and stem broccoli, because really stem broccoli is designed for multi-harvest. You can easily get 3-5 harvest throughout the season. So that's a really great addition for your household.
So what I'm kind of thinking and hearing is that maybe stem broccoli is easier for the home gardener to grow than head broccoli, crown broccoli, I guess.
Absolutely. That's what I always recommend.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna do stem broccoli now. Yay. Okay, that's good. Let's see. There's another question, and I think the answer is yes, but broccoli and cauliflower, are these tips that we're giving for broccoli pretty much similar to growing cauliflower?
Most of the time, yes.
What might be some of the things that are different for a cauliflower?
So the timing of cauliflower is even more important than broccoli. So because of the vanillization process where cauliflower needs the coat to start the head. And then if it gets too hot, the head, the curd, the white thing turns into flour really, really quick. So based on your zip code, you want to choose a cauliflower variety way more careful than you choose a broccoli head. If you have a local expert on growing cauliflower, that would be the best
Yes.
to go ask.
And I know that a lot of like our NGB members that are selling cauliflower, a lot of times like on their website, they'll say, you know, these are good for northern gardens or these are good for southern gardens. So, or contact the customer service department or contact your local extension office. You know, what variety is known to grow well and produce well and mature at the right time in my area. We always like to refer people to extension because that's a really good resource.
Yeah.
I think I heard one of you say something about direct seeding, you know, right in ground. Is that something you really would recommend for a home gardener? And if so, would that be just gardeners in certain climates? I mean, I can't see doing that in Chicago because of our short growing season, but maybe I'm mistaken about that. Would there be a certain climate where direct sowing is a good idea?
Well, give it a try, right? Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't hurt
I
to
think
try it.
I think for fall crop it would work. I lived in Illinois for my school for 6 years, so I believe if you direct seed in the summer, in the fall you will get harvest.
Well, I'm going to try that now. That sounds good. And we got a couple of comments here about it sounds like trying a fall crop would be easier, fewer bug pressure, disease pressure, maybe less bolting. Somebody else grew cauliflowers, less heat, so they grew it in the fall. Okay, I'm going to try that. I'll report back. I'm going to do some direct sowing and we'll see what happens.
You have to really keep an eye on it. So remember that stage when you were babying the plants in your house. You have to do the same thing outside. So make sure that it's not drying out, especially
Okay,
if you're in summer, and you're not getting a lot of rain.
right.
Yeah, and maybe go a little bit deeper on the seed just so it doesn't wash away if you are somewhere where it rains a lot.
Okay, another good tip there. Awesome. I'll take daily pictures and see what happens. Was Diana a success or was Diana a failure this year?
Try a few different varieties too.
Exactly. Yep. I'll have to go back and try some of these wonderful varieties that are in our Year of the Broccoli program. Let's see here. What are some other things? What about, do they need full sun? Do they need shade? Of course, at different times of the year, different parts of your garden might adapt. Would there be some ideal conditions about giving it some shade, maybe later in the year or later as it gets closer to maturity?
I would say full sun is broccoli's favorite condition. If you're not worried about anthocyanin getting purple, where I mentioned earlier, it's actually beneficial for the health. So I see some people try to shade a little bit in extreme heat. That's really just to cool them down. Besides, I have not seen real reasons why would we want to shade it.
Okay. And I'm sorry that I didn't talk about this earlier. Soil, what you're putting your broccoli plant in is super, super important no matter what you're growing. Are there any conditions, recommendations on how to prep your soil before planting broccoli? Are there any special needs or are they pretty basic? Like, okay, if you've got good garden soil, your broccoli is going to do okay.
You want it to be well worked. You don't want it to be too heavy because it's as small as the seed is, the root system on these plants is really surprisingly large. So there's a lot going on underground there. So make sure that you've worked in, some compost or whatever it is you do in your garden, and then mulch if you have heavy soil, just to make sure that the roots can get in there. I think with small seeds, sometimes we're tempted to think that they don't need the great soil, and they do. So it's important to make sure you do that work in advance because the better your soil, the better your plant's going to be. That goes for everything, really.
Exactly. Yeah, we can never forget about the soil quality, how
Yeah.
important that is. Anything else to add to that, Sufei?
Yeah, I agree with Heather. I can bring more maybe the scientific
Mhm.
perspective of the plant. So broccoli, when it's smaller, it prefers higher potassium and calcium. So that means nitrogen is not a necessary nutrition to fertilize the broccoli when it's young. But as soon as it starts to button, it really wants nitrogen very, very bad. So at that level, at that time, the higher the nitrogen concentration, as long as it doesn't burn the plant, the bigger of a head you are gonna get. So I see a lot of people just try to ignore the broccoli before it starts to button and then start to really fertilize after it's starting to produce a crop. So that may be something, some trick, or watch out for your late season. So,
Okay,
but I want to share maybe the tip after you harvest the plant. So actually, if we grind up the broccoli after harvest, leave them in the ground, that residue broccoli actually helps you clean up the soil because of the glucosinolate content and the sulfur. It's a natural cleanser of the soil to get rid of a lot of germs.
Okay, so you're saying that once we're finished harvesting, basically just chop up the remaining broccoli plant, stir it into the soil, and that's going to be even better than for the next year?
Oh yeah, definitely. So we have, I know some orchards between the trees, they will grow a crop of broccoli, and not to harvest it, just to grind up, till it back to the soil, so they can start trees clean. So that's how really broccoli is not only beneficial for human, but also for the nature.
That's amazing. Okay, I didn't
Genius.
know that. That is really good to know. Okay, I'm not going to pull it up and put it, well, I would probably put it in my compost bin, which would be fine, but just putting it back in there. So going back to the fertilizer, so most fertilizers are somewhat evenly balanced NPK. So if you put a balanced fertilizer on, will that nitrogen just sit there until the plant needs it? Or will it wash out, degrade, whatever the case might be? So you really do need to add more nitrogen once it starts to button.
Maybe that's a crop advisor question. Based on my best knowledge, though, fertilizer has two types. One is slow release, one is fast release. The fast release type of nitrogen will get leached in the ground very fast. But the slow release kind of have a time period. It slowly releases the nitrogen into the soil. So that's probably where compost or manure is more handy, because it naturally degrades and kind of interact better with the soil and stays longer for the plant.
Okay. Good. Are the leaves edible by humans? And are they tasty?
It's kale. It's kale.
Yeah. They're, again, as good as the stem. I always eat the leaves.
So how do you prepare them? Do you just eat them raw like you would kale, or can you saute them like you would kale?
I just put them in while I'm cooking the broccoli, so I prefer them cooked. So I just, while I'm chopping broccoli, also include the leaves. I'm talking about the baby leaves. I haven't eaten the big leaves, but the baby leaves that are on the side of the plant when you harvest the heads of broccoli are really good, just cooked along with the broccoli.
Excellent. Okay, wait a minute. Wow, I'm getting questions all over here. Worm castings. Do you recommend worm castings as a fertilizer or as a soil amendment? Sophie,
think that would
gonna look at you for this one.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that would fall in the same group as compost, but I'm not an expert on that.
Yeah, I I'm kind of giving a little bit doubt here if worm cast is heavy enough as compost or manure, but definitely early season, like worm cast should be okay to blend it in with the soil. So
Okay, that's good. Now we've got a question about saving broccoli seeds. To me, somebody that just sounds like a lot of work. Can you save broccoli seeds? Here comes in the question about hybrid versus OP. Any comments on seed saving for broccoli?
So typically, if it's F1, when you buy the seeds from like Johnny Seeds, um, there's not much value in saving the seeds because when you grow out, the broccoli will not look the same. However, if you buy OP and you checked with the vendor that it's okay to propagate and save the seeds, then I would recommend if you don't have natural pollinators around in your neighborhood, pollinate from flower to flower. So make sure that your population of broccoli has that heterosis to help with the next crop. But always check with the vendor if it's okay to save the seed.
And here's a comment. I say the broccoli seeds to use as microgreens in the winter. So then you don't really care what it ends up as far as, the crown. So
Yeah, that's a good tip and something to do with the plants when they bolt and you didn't want them to. It is
exactly.
trickier than you'd think sometimes too. I think people forget how much longer that full seed production takes. So if you're planning to do that, the earlier you can start, better, because the seed production takes the plant a lot longer than just growing and harvesting the young heads.
Right. When you first start seeing it bolt, how much more time is it before you get seeds?
I'm not an expert, but it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a long time. Right. Okay. We're getting close to the hour again. This always happens. Okay. I want to pose a question to both of you. What is your favorite way to prepare or eat broccoli?
My favorite is sauteed broccoli spears, where I can eat the flower and the stem.
Excellent. Do you have any special spices you add to your saute?
Only salt. The
Only
best taste broccoli is pure broccoli.
Okay, so you're a purist, and hey, when you have the best broccolis on the market, right? That's what you two are saying. You don't really need any extra seasoning.
Yeah, salt, little salt, I like a little olive oil, maybe a little garlic, and sauteed, and then roasted. If you're in the fall and it's the cool season, it's nice to mix with a little olive oil and roast as well. And just being sure and include as much of that stem, include that stem and those leaves too in both those processes. They're really good.
Right. Don't toss it away. Use
No,
the stem.
use it.
Yes. Do you have to peel the stem, or is that not necessary?
It kind of depends on the variety. If it looks kind of big and tough, I would peel it, and you can see there's a layer in there that can be peeled off. A lot of the newer varieties, I think that layer is thinner and you probably don't need to peel it most of the time.
Yeah.
Certainly the baby broccoli, you don't need to peel. You use everything there too. So again, that makes it easy for home gardens. The other thing I like about baby broccoli is you're harvesting a little bit at a time. So I'll plant it in the fall and just harvest, enough for that night's dinner. And then a week later, I can harvest more. So that's really nice for extending the season.
Very good. Well, guys, this has been wonderful, very interesting. I love learning all the new tidbits. And like I said, I'm inspired. I want to go plant some broccoli. I'm going to try direct sow this year since I never have. So thank you, Heather. Thank you, Sufei. This was really informational. And to everybody, we will send out an email. If not today, it'll be on Monday, and we will include this recording as well as some other links to our website and other members.